You got a license for this operation?
Just fixing my car, officer. Everything is in order.
I'm only gonna say this once. You cooperate, or this gets a lot worse for you. Understand?
Fixed truck idled behind him, coughing smoke. I didn't say that, Marcus replied. The officer stepped closer. Too close. His badge caught the light. His hand rested on his belt. Then why are you arguing with me, sir? I'm not, Marcus said. His voice stayed level. His heart didn't. A few customers stood frozen near the office door. One woman looked down at her phone. A young kid stared openly. Nobody spoke. The officer leaned in. We got a call. Suspicious activity. Man in a restricted area. Refusing to cooperate. Marcus blinked. This is my shop. The officer laughed again. Short. Sharp. Mean. Yeah? And I'm the president. Marcus felt the old pressure build in his chest. The kind that came when silence was safer than truth. When every word could turn into a charge. You want to see my ID? Marcus asked. The officer's smile widened. I want you to step back. Now. Marcus took one slow step back. His heel bumped a tool cart. It rattled. The officer's tone dropped. Hands where I can see them. Marcus raised his hands. Oil-stained palms open. Calm on the outside. Tight inside. Around them, the garage went quiet. Then the officer said the line Marcus had heard his whole life. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Marcus looked at the man's eyes. Cold. Certain. And for the first time, he wondered if staying calm would be enough. The officer didn't lower his voice. That's far enough, he said. Marcus stopped walking. He had only taken 3 steps toward the office. The keys were on the desk. The registration papers. The lease. All of it was right there. I'm just getting, Marcus began. I said stop. Marcus stopped. He felt every eye in the garage settle on him. The truck behind him rattled louder now. The sound filled the space where no one else spoke. The officer circled him slowly. Boots scraping concrete. You always move this much when police are present. I move when I'm asked to, Marcus said. The officer smirked. Funny. Because I didn't ask. Marcus swallowed. He kept his hands visible. He knew the rules. He always knew the rules. What's your name? The officer asked. Marcus Reed. Last name again? Reed. The officer nodded, like he was filing it away. You got ID on you, Marcus? Yes. Where? In my wallet. And where's that? Back pocket. The officer raised a finger. Don't reach for it. Marcus froze again. A familiar heat crept up his neck. The wrong move lived everywhere in moments like this. You said you wanted ID, Marcus said quietly. I said I might, the officer replied. Right now I want you standing still. One of the customers shifted near the door. Marcus saw it from the corner of his eye. He wished the man would leave. Witnesses didn't always help. The officer looked around the garage. This place yours? Yes. The officer laughed. On paper? Yes. Because it doesn't look like it. Marcus didn't answer. Looks like a lot of cash work, the officer continued. People coming and going. No clear signage. No front desk. There's a sign outside, Marcus said. And an office. The officer leaned closer. You talking back? No. Because it sounds like it. Marcus felt his jaw tighten. He forced it loose. He thought about his father. About staying calm. About surviving moments, not winning them. We got a call, the officer said. Suspicious behavior. Marcus nodded. You said that. Refusing to cooperate. I'm cooperating. The officer's eyes narrowed. You're cooperating just enough. That stung. It always did. The space where obedience was never quite enough. The officer turned and spoke into his radio. Yeah, I'm gonna need another unit. Male subject. Unclear ownership. Possible obstruction. Marcus's chest tightened. Backup changed everything. You don't need that, Marcus said before he could stop himself. The officer turned back slowly. Excuse me? Marcus held his gaze. I have paperwork. I have ID. This can be cleared up. The officer stepped forward again. Close enough that Marcus could smell his cologne. You don't tell me what I need. Silence fell hard. The officer's voice dropped. Step over here. He pointed to the hood of a customer's car. Shiny. Clean. Wrong. Why? Marcus asked. The officer's smile vanished. Because I said so. Marcus took one step. Then another. Each one felt heavier than the last. His palms rested on the metal. Cold seeped into his skin. Spread your feet, the officer said. Marcus did. The officer moved behind him. Too close. Marcus stared at the reflection in the hood. He barely recognized his own face. You got anything on you I should know about? The officer asked. No. Any reason you're nervous? Marcus paused. I'm not nervous. The officer chuckled. Everyone's nervous. A siren sounded in the distance. Growing louder. Marcus closed his eyes for half a second. Not in fear. In focus. Because whatever was coming next, he knew one thing for sure. This wasn't about a call anymore. The second patrol car pulled in fast. Tires squealed just enough to announce authority. The red and blue lights washed over the garage walls, flashing across chrome, glass, and oil-stained concrete. Marcus stayed still. Hands flat on the hood. Feet spread. The metal felt colder now. Another officer stepped out. Younger. Quieter. His eyes moved first, not his mouth. He took in the scene, the customers, the tools, Marcus's posture, before saying a word. What do we got? The second officer asked. Suspicious male, the first officer said. Claims ownership. Won't fully cooperate. Marcus spoke carefully. I've offered my ID and paperwork. The first officer waved a hand. See? Still talking. The second officer glanced at Marcus, then at the car hood. Sir, you can relax your shoulders. Marcus didn't move. I'm fine. Relax, the first officer snapped. Or you'll give yourself away. Give myself away from what? Marcus asked. The first officer turned sharply. You want to keep asking questions? Marcus went quiet. The second officer shifted his weight. What's the call again? Suspicious activity, the first officer repeated. Possible unauthorized business. This is a licensed garage, Marcus said before thinking. The first officer exhaled through his nose. You really don't know when to stop. The second officer raised a hand slightly. Let's just verify. Exactly, the first officer said. That's what I'm doing. Verification. Marcus had heard that word before. It sounded neutral. Safe. But it never was. The first officer nodded toward the office. You say the paperwork's in there? Yes. And you didn't think to bring it out before we asked? You didn't ask. The officer smirked. Funny how that works. The second officer walked toward the office door. I'll take a look. Don't touch anything, Marcus said, then stopped himself. Both officers turned. What was that? The first officer asked. Marcus stared at the hood. Nothing. The second officer paused. Sir, you mind if we look? I mind, Marcus said quietly. But I understand. The second officer nodded once and went inside. The garage felt smaller without him. The first officer leaned closer again. You see how this goes? He said. We do this the easy way, or we dig. Marcus said nothing. The officer lowered his voice. You got warrants? No. Prior arrests? No. Because I can check. I know. The officer straightened. You got employees here? Yes. Where are they? Working. The officer looked around. Funny. I don't see anyone in charge. Marcus clenched his jaw. The second officer came back out holding a folder. There's paperwork. Lease agreement. Business license. The first officer didn't take it. Name match. Yes. Address. Yes. The first officer finally glanced at the papers. Just a glance. Not enough to read. Could be fake, he said. Marcus felt something shift inside his chest. Slow. Heavy. It's not, Marcus said. The officer laughed. You sure about that? Yes. The second officer cleared his throat. Everything seems in order so far. So far, the first officer repeated. That's the key part. He handed the folder back without opening it fully. What about the vehicles? Any of these stolen? No. You sure? Yes. You check VINs? Yes. Today? Marcus hesitated. Not today. The officer smiled. There it is. The second officer frowned. That's not a violation. Could be, the first officer said. If he's operating without proper inspection. Marcus turned his head slightly. That's not true. The officer's hand landed on Marcus's shoulder. Firm. Claiming space. Eyes forward. Marcus complied. The officer spoke louder now. See, this is why we do procedure. Because people lie. I'm not lying, Marcus said. Everyone says that. A customer near the door finally spoke. He's been here for years. The officer snapped his head toward the man. Sir, stay out of it. The man raised his hands and stepped back. The second officer looked uncomfortable. We don't have grounds to detain him. Yet, the first officer said. He pulled out a small notebook. We're gonna do this right. Marcus's stomach dropped. What does that mean? Marcus asked. It means, the officer said, writing, we're gonna take our time. He looked up. Turn around. Marcus hesitated for half a second. The officer's voice hardened. Turn. Around. Marcus turned. Hands behind your back. Marcus's breath caught. Am I being arrested? No, the officer said. Just detained. The word hit harder than a shout. The second officer opened his mouth, then closed it. Marcus brought his hands back slowly. His wrists felt exposed. Vulnerable. The officer stepped closer. Too close again. Just until we finish verifying, the officer said calmly. Marcus stared at the concrete floor. Oil stains shaped like maps. Paths leading nowhere. In the distance, someone lifted a phone. And Marcus realized something with cold clarity. Procedure wasn't about order. It was about control. The cuffs never clicked shut. Not yet. The officer kept them loose, hanging from his fingers, just enough for Marcus to see them. Just enough to understand what could happen next. Relax, the officer said. You're making this look worse than it is. Marcus didn't answer. His hands stayed behind his back. His shoulders burned from holding still. The second officer shifted again. We've checked his license. The paperwork lines up. The first officer didn't look at him. He scanned the garage instead. The people. The phones. 3 customers now. 2 had stepped outside but stayed close. A woman leaned against her car, phone half raised, pretending not to record. A teenage boy didn't pretend at all. Sir, the first officer said loudly, are you filming police activity? The boy swallowed. It's legal. The officer stared him down. So is walking away. The boy lowered the phone an inch. Didn't leave. Marcus felt a strange pull in his chest. Fear mixed with something else. Pressure. Exposure. When eyes watched, rules changed, but not always for the better. The officer turned back to Marcus. You enjoy the attention? No, Marcus said. Could have fooled me, the officer replied. Standing here like you got nothing to hide. I don't, Marcus said. That's what worries me. The second officer stepped in. We should keep this professional. It is professional, the first officer snapped. This is exactly how we keep order. Order. Marcus almost laughed. He didn't. The officer walked toward the office again. What's in the back room? Parts, Marcus said. Mind if we check? Yes, Marcus replied. I do. The officer turned sharply. Say that again. I don't consent to a search, Marcus said, careful. Unless you have a warrant. The garage went silent. The officer stared at him. Slowly, a grin spread across his face. Not amused. Pleased. There it is, he said. Lawyer talk. I'm not a lawyer, Marcus said. But you sound like one, the officer replied. Funny how that happens. The second officer rubbed his temple. We don't have probable cause. The first officer waved him off. We don't need it yet. Yet. A man stepped forward from the crowd. Mid-40s. Grease on his boots. He's telling the truth, the man said. This place is legit. The officer turned on him. And you are? A customer. Then you're done talking. The man hesitated. The officer took a step toward him. I said you're done. The man backed up. Silence rushed back in. Marcus felt it then. The shift. The power wasn't just on him anymore. It spread. Pressed down on everyone. The officer lowered his voice again. You see what you're doing? He said to Marcus. Making people uncomfortable. Marcus stared straight ahead. I didn't call you. The officer's smile vanished. What's your tone? The second officer's radio crackled. A voice asked for an update. Situation's ongoing, the first officer said. Subject's uncooperative. Marcus closed his eyes for a second. Uncooperative. The word followed him through life. In stores. At traffic stops. In meetings. The woman by the car finally spoke. He hasn't done anything. The officer pointed at her. Step back. She didn't move. Oh. I'm standing on the sidewalk, she said. The officer's jaw tightened. He looked around again. Too many eyes now. Too many witnesses. He turned back to Marcus, voice sharp. This is your fault. Marcus opened his eyes. How? You could have made this simple. I tried. The officer leaned in close. So close Marcus felt his breath. Simple as following instructions without attitude. Marcus met his gaze. Calm. Steady. Attitude isn't a crime, Marcus said. The officer straightened fast. No. But obstruction is. The second officer looked alarmed. He hasn't obstructed anything. The first officer ignored him. He pulled out his radio again. I'm gonna need a supervisor. The words hit like a drop. A supervisor meant time. Reports. Cameras. Higher stakes. The officer lowered the radio and smiled. Congratulations. You just upgraded this stop. Marcus felt a flicker of something new. Not fear. Not anger. Resolve. Can I at least put my hands down? Marcus asked. The officer considered it. The crowd. The cameras. Fine, he said. But don't move. Marcus brought his hands forward slowly. Blood rushed back into his fingers. They tingled. The officer pointed at him. You step out of line, this goes sideways. Marcus nodded once. In the distance, another siren began to rise. And Marcus understood something with sudden clarity. This wasn't about suspicion anymore. It was about who would break first. The supervisor hadn't arrived yet. But his shadow already had. The first officer paced now. Slow. Measured. Like time itself was on his side. He stopped near the tool rack, picked up a wrench, weighed it in his hand. Interesting place, he said. Lot of tools that could be misused. Marcus watched the wrench carefully. They're tools. Everything is, the officer replied. Depends on who's holding it. The second officer shifted again. Let's not escalate. The first officer ignored him. You always this quiet? Marcus didn't answer. That silence, the officer continued, people mistake it for strength. Marcus looked at him. What do you mistake it for? The officer smiled thinly. Guilt. A low murmur moved through the crowd. Someone whispered, that's messed up. The officer snapped his head around. I didn't hear you. The whisper stopped. Marcus felt the weight of the moment settle deeper. Silence had protected him before. But now it felt like it was costing him something. Space. Ground. Dignity. You know, the officer said, most people in your position get loud. Start yelling. You didn't. I didn't need to, Marcus said. Or maybe you know how this ends, the officer replied. Marcus swallowed. His throat felt dry. The second officer stepped closer to his partner. Lowered his voice. We're crossing into gray territory. The first officer didn't look at him. Gray is where truth hides. That's not how policy reads. Policy doesn't run the street, the first officer said. Marcus watched the exchange. One man loud with power. The other quiet with doubt. He wondered which one would matter more when reports were written. A customer slipped out the door. Another followed. Fear moved faster than justice. The officer noticed. See that, he said to Marcus. You're bad for business. Marcus closed his eyes for a beat. Opened them again. You're the one stopping work. The officer stepped forward. Say that again. You're stopping my employees from working, Marcus said. Clear. Calm. The officer's jaw flexed. He looked around. Cameras. Phones. He adjusted his tone. Sir, he said loudly, we are temporarily pausing operations for public safety. Public safety. The words landed hollow. The second officer checked his watch. Supervisor's 5 minutes out. Good, the first officer said. Gives us time. For what? Marcus asked. To document, the officer replied. To make sure our story's straight. Marcus felt the phrase hit him hard. Our story. The officer pulled out a form. Started writing. Slow. Deliberate. What are you writing? Marcus asked. Incident notes. Can I see them? The officer laughed. That's not how this works. Marcus felt his chest tighten again. Not panic. Something colder. You're writing me as a problem, Marcus said. The officer looked up. You made yourself one. The second officer finally spoke louder. That's not fair. The first officer turned. Are you questioning my call? I'm questioning the necessity, the second officer said. His cooperative. The first officer stared at him. Long hard. Noted, he said. I'll remember that. The second officer looked away. Marcus understood then. Silence didn't just cost the person being silenced. It cost everyone around them. The officer finished writing and tore the paper free. Here's what's going to happen, he said. Until the supervisor arrives, you're being detained. You are not free to leave. Marcus nodded. I understand. You don't, the officer said. Because you think this ends when he gets here. Marcus said nothing. The officer leaned in. Sometimes it just gets official. A car pulled up outside. Not a police car. A news van. Logo on the side. A local station. The crowd shifted again. Phones rose higher. The officer cursed under his breath. Well, he said, forcing a smile, looks like you got an audience. Marcus felt a strange mix of dread and relief. A woman stepped out of the van. Press badge on her jacket. She scanned the scene fast. Officer, she called out, can you tell us what's going on? The first officer straightened. His posture changed. Less swagger. More Polish. Routine investigation, he said. The reporter looked at Marcus. His hands. His face. Sir, are you being detained? Marcus hesitated. The officer's eyes burned into him. Yes, Marcus said. I am. On what grounds? She asked. The officer stepped between them. You'll have to wait. For what? For clearance. The reporter raised her MIC from who? The officer's jaw tightened. From down the street, a black SUV turned the corner. Slow. Official. The second officer looked up. That's him. The supervisor. Marcus watched the vehicle approach. His heart beat steady now. Heavy. Certain. Because he knew something the officer didn't. Silence had cost him time. But it had also bought him patience. And patience had a name. It was truth. The black SUV rolled to a stop at the curb. The engine idled. Quiet. Controlled. The supervisor stepped out slowly. Late 40s. Crisp uniform. No rush in his movements. He scanned the scene before walking in. The crowd. The news van. The phones. Marcus. The first officer straightened like a student called to the front of the room. Sergeant, he said. Glad you're here. The supervisor nodded once. What's the situation? Suspicious individual, the officer replied quickly. Possible obstruction. We're verifying ownership and compliance. The supervisor looked at Marcus. Took in the oil-stained shirt. The calm eyes. The stillness. Sir, he said, what's your name? Marcus Reed. Are you being detained? Yes. Why? The first officer jumped in. He's been uncooperative. Refused consent. Questioned procedure. Marcus felt the familiar urge to explain rise up. He pushed it down. He answered only what was asked. I offered ID, Marcus said. And paperwork. The supervisor glanced at the second officer. Is that accurate? The second officer hesitated. Then nodded. Yes, sir. The air shifted. The supervisor turned back to the first officer. Did you review the documents? Briefly, the officer said. But there were inconsistencies. What inconsistencies? The supervisor asked. The officer paused. We're still determining that. The supervisor didn't respond right away. He looked around again. The reporter. The bystanders. The phone still raised. All right, he said. Let's slow this down. The first officer forced a smile. Of course. The supervisor faced Marcus. Sir, do you have identification on you? Yes. Where is it? In my wallet. Back pocket. The supervisor nodded. You can retrieve it. Slowly. Marcus reached back with care. Every movement measured. He pulled out his wallet and handed it over. The supervisor opened it. Looked at the license. The address. The name. Matches the paperwork? He asked. Yes, the second officer said. The supervisor handed the wallet back. Mr. Reed, what do you do here? I run the shop. How long? 7 years. The supervisor nodded again. Any prior issues with law enforcement at this location? No. The first officer cleared his throat. Sir, there are still unanswered questions. Such as? The supervisor asked. Financial irregularities. Cash operations. Marcus exhaled slowly. We accept cards. The supervisor raised a hand. Enough. The word landed clean. Final. The first officer went quiet. The supervisor stepped closer to Marcus. Lowered his voice. Is there anything else you want to share that might help clear this up? Marcus looked at him. He looked at the officer behind him. The crowd. The cameras. This was the moment. The one he had waited for. Yes, Marcus said. The first officer scoffed. Oh, here we go. Marcus didn't look at him. I have additional identification. The supervisor's eyebrows lifted slightly. What kind? Marcus hesitated just long enough to feel the weight of it. The cost. The truth. Something I don't usually carry out, Marcus said. For this exact reason. The first officer laughed. Loud. Sharp. Let me guess. Another fake ID. The crowd murmured. Marcus reached inside his jacket slowly. Every eye tracked the movement. Careful, the first officer warned. His hand dropped to his belt. The supervisor raised a hand. It's fine. Marcus pulled out a slim leather holder. Worn. Plain. He opened it. Inside, the badge caught the light. Gold. Subtle. Official. The seal was unmistakable. The words executive office stamped clean and sharp. The laughter stopped. The first officer's smile froze. Then cracked. Then vanished. The supervisor leaned in. His face changed instantly. Color draining. Eyes widening. He took the badge carefully. Examined it. Flipped it. Checked the number. The garage was silent. The reporter's MIC rose higher. The supervisor looked up at Marcus. His voice was different now. Respectful. Controlled. Mr. Reed, he said, can you explain why you have this? Marcus met his eyes. I consult on federal infrastructure security. Automotive supply chains. I advise. I don't advertise it. The first officer took a step back without realizing it. The supervisor nodded slowly. I see. The first officer found his voice again. Thin. That doesn't mean. It means, the supervisor cut in, we need to stop. He turned to the first officer. Now. The officer's face flushed. Sir, with all due respect. None, the supervisor said. None is due right now. The crowd buzzed. Phones shook. Someone whispered, oh my God. The supervisor handed the badge back to Marcus. Thank you for your patience. Marcus closed the holder and slipped it away. The first officer stood stiff. Smaller somehow. The supervisor turned to him. Step aside. The officer obeyed. The supervisor faced the reporter. This situation is being addressed. Was this a lawful detention? She asked. The supervisor paused. Cameras pressed in. That will be reviewed, he said. The pause said everything. Marcus felt the adrenaline finally hit him. His hands trembled just slightly. He clenched them. Grounded himself. The first officer stared at the floor. The supervisor spoke again. Internal affairs will be notified. The words dropped like weight. The officer looked up sharply. Sir. Enough, the supervisor said. You're done. The crowd reacted all at once. Gasps. Whispers. Phones fully raised now. Marcus felt a wave of relief crash into something heavier. Sadness. Anger. Exhaustion. The supervisor turned back to Marcus. Mr. Reed, you are free to go. Marcus nodded. Thank you. But he didn't move. Because freedom didn't erase what had already happened. And as the first officer was escorted away from the center of the garage, Marcus realized something quietly, painfully true. Verification had never been about facts. It had always been about power. The garage didn't go back to normal. Not after the badge. Not after the shift. The supervisor moved with urgency now. He spoke into his radio in short, controlled bursts. Codes. Names. Instructions. His tone carried authority without volume. "Secure body cam footage," he said. "All units." The first officer stood near the wall. Hands empty. Shoulders tight. The confidence that once filled his stance had drained out of him. He avoided looking at Marcus. Marcus noticed. The reporter stepped closer. "Sergeant, can you confirm the credentials?" The supervisor didn't answer right away. He looked at Marcus first. A silent question. Marcus nodded once. "Yes," the supervisor said. "The credentials are valid." The word valid rippled through the crowd. Phones lifted higher. A murmur turned into a low roar of whispers. The first officer spoke suddenly. "That badge doesn't mean he's above the law." No one laughed this time. The supervisor turned sharply. "No one said that." Marcus finally spoke again. "I never claimed it." The officer's jaw worked. He looked cornered now. "Then why didn't you show it earlier?" Marcus looked at him steadily. "Because I wanted to see how far this would go without it." Silence slammed down. The supervisor inhaled slowly. "Officer, that's enough." The first officer took a step forward. "Sir, with respect, anyone could have been intimidated." "By procedure?" Marcus asked quietly. The officer stopped. Marcus's voice stayed calm, but the words cut clean. "By tone. By assumptions. By the way you spoke to me before you knew who I was." The officer opened his mouth. Closed it again. The supervisor turned to the second officer. "You stayed quiet. Why?" The second officer swallowed. "I wasn't sure when to step in." The supervisor nodded once. "That will also be addressed." The second officer's shoulders sagged. A man from the crowd spoke up. "So if he didn't have that badge, what would have happened?" The supervisor didn't answer. That was answer enough. The reporter seized the moment. "Officer," she said, pointing her mic at the first officer, "do you treat all citizens this way?" The officer looked around. Cameras everywhere now. His voice came out tight. "I follow protocol." Marcus shook his head slowly. "You followed bias." The word hung there. The supervisor raised his hand. "We're done speaking publicly." Too late. The damage had been done. 2 more patrol cars arrived. Quiet. No lights. Officers stepped out and took positions without drama. The scene was contained now. Controlled. The supervisor pulled Marcus aside. Lowered his voice. "I want to apologize." Marcus listened. "For how this was handled," the supervisor continued. "Regardless of credentials." Marcus nodded. "I appreciate that." But his eyes said something else. The supervisor saw it. "This won't disappear," he said. "There will be consequences." Marcus looked past him. At the officer by the wall. "I know." The supervisor straightened. "Internal Affairs is already pulling footage." The first officer's head snapped up. "Sir." "Stop," the supervisor said. "You've said enough for one day." The officer's face flushed red. He ran a hand through his hair. "I was doing my job." Marcus spoke softly. "So was I." The officer laughed once. Hollow. "Fixing cars?" Marcus met his eyes. "Fixing systems." That shut him up. The supervisor turned to the crowd. "This business will resume normal operations. Thank you for your patience." People didn't move right away. They stared. Took it in. Then, slowly, some nodded. Some shook their heads. Some looked at Marcus with something close to awe. Others with shame. The reporter lowered her mic. "Sir," she said to Marcus, "how does it feel knowing this only changed when your status was revealed?" Marcus thought for a moment. The truth pressed in. "It feels familiar," he said. She blinked. "Familiar?" "Yes," Marcus replied. "It happens every day. Just not on camera." The supervisor glanced at her sharply, but she already had what she needed. The first officer was approached by another uniform. Quiet words were exchanged. No handcuffs. But the message was clear. He was escorted toward a patrol car. As he passed Marcus, he stopped. For a second, Marcus thought he might apologize. Instead, the officer said, "You set me up." Marcus shook his head. "You revealed yourself." The officer scoffed, then looked away. The car door closed. The sound echoed. Marcus stood there, surrounded by tools and engines and people who now saw him differently. Not because he had changed, but because the illusion had broken. The supervisor returned. "You're free to go about your day." Marcus nodded. "I will." But he didn't move yet. He looked at the garage, the floor, the wrench on the rack, the space where his hands had been forced behind his back. He felt the weight of it settle into his bones. The badge had protected him, but it couldn't undo the cost. As the patrol cars pulled away one by one, Marcus understood something with sharp clarity. Power didn't come from what you carried in your pocket. It came from what you were willing to expose. And now, the exposure had only just begun. The garage felt different once the patrol cars pulled away. Not quieter, heavier. People didn't rush back to their cars. They lingered, like they were standing inside a moment they knew they would talk about later. The kind that followed you home. The reporter paced slowly, phone pressed to her ear now. "We've got confirmation," she said into it. "Yes." Presidential credentials. Detention caught on multiple cameras. Marcus heard his name again. Not shouted. Passed in whispers. The supervisor stood off to the side with two other officers. One held a tablet. Footage played back in short clips. Body cam angles. Audio spikes. The officers laugh. The word "suspicious male." The command to turn around. Marcus didn't watch. He watched the faces of the people watching. The woman by the sidewalk wiped at her eyes. The teenage boy stared at the ground, jaw tight. The customer who had tried to speak earlier kept shaking his head, over and over, like he couldn't reset what he'd seen. The supervisor approached Marcus again. His tone was quieter now. Less official. "This is going higher than internal review," he said. "City oversight. Possibly federal." Marcus nodded. "It should." The supervisor hesitated. "You don't have to stay." "I know," Marcus said. "I'm not running." The supervisor accepted that. Internal Affairs is requesting a statement. "When you're ready." "When I'm ready," Marcus repeated. "Yes," the supervisor said. "Your timeline." That was new. Choice. Across the garage, the first officer sat in the back of a patrol car. Door open. Not cuffed. A different officer stood nearby, arms crossed. The first officer's head was down now. Shoulders slumped. A few minutes ago, he had filled the space. Now the space had swallowed him. The reporter returned, microphone lowered. "Mr. Reed," she said gently, "can I ask you something off record?" Marcus looked at her. "There's no such thing anymore." She nodded. "Fair." She gestured around them. "This footage, it's clear. But some people will say this only mattered because of who you are." Marcus exhaled slowly. "That's the part that hurts." She waited. "I didn't become someone important today," Marcus continued. "I just became visible." The reporter's eyes softened. "Do you think this will change anything?" Marcus thought about that. About the officer's laugh. About the second officer's silence. About the way procedure bent until it broke. "I think it will make it harder to pretend," he said. Behind them, the supervisor raised his voice. "All right, listen up." The crowd turned. "This incident is under formal investigation," the supervisor announced. "Any additional footage should be submitted through official channels." People nodded. Some stepped forward to exchange information. Others finally left. Engine started. Life tried to move again. The supervisor lowered his voice as he turned back to Marcus. "The officer has been placed on administrative leave. Effective immediately." Marcus closed his eyes for a brief moment. "Opened them." "And the others?" he asked. The supervisor didn't dodge it. "The entire response will be reviewed." Marcus nodded. That mattered. The second officer approached slowly. His face was tight with something like shame. "Sir," he said to Marcus, "I should have said more." Marcus studied him. "You still can." The officer swallowed. "I will. In my statement." Marcus held his gaze, then nodded once. "Good." The officer walked away lighter than he arrived. The reporter packed up her gear. Before leaving, she turned back. "This story's going to air tonight." Marcus wasn't surprised. She hesitated. "I'm sorry this happened to you." Marcus met her eyes. "It happens every day." She didn't argue. When she left, the garage finally began to empty. Tools were picked up. Doors opened. The truck that had been idling earlier was turned off. Marcus stood alone near the center of it all. The supervisor approached one last time. "You'll be contacted." "I expect that," Marcus said. The supervisor paused. For what it's worth, this didn't go unnoticed. Marcus looked around the garage. The scuffed floor. The stains that never came out. I didn't do this to be noticed, he said. I know, the supervisor replied. That's why it matters. They shook hands. Brief. Professional. When the last patrol car pulled away, Marcus finally let his shoulders drop. The adrenaline faded. What replaced it was something deeper. A dull ache behind his ribs. The cost of standing still while being pushed. He walked to the tool rack and picked up the same wrench the officer had handled earlier. Turned it over in his hands. A tool. Just a tool. It depended on who held it. Marcus set it back carefully. Outside, sirens wailed somewhere far away. Another stop. Another moment. As he locked the office door, Marcus knew one thing for certain. Exposure didn't end with cameras turning off. That was just where accountability began. The calls started the next morning. Marcus stood in his kitchen, coffee untouched, phone vibrating on the counter. City numbers. Unknown numbers. One from a blocked line. He let the first few go to voicemail. When he finally answered, the voice on the other end was calm and practiced. Mr. Reed, this is Internal Affairs. Would like to schedule a formal interview. Marcus looked out the window. The street was quiet. Normal. Too normal. I'll come in, he said. With counsel. That's acceptable, the voice replied. The next call came minutes later. The City Oversight Committee. Then a civil rights organization. Then the shop's landlord, checking in. Not about rent. About safety. The story had spread overnight. Marcus turned on the TV. His garage filled the screen. The officer's laugh. The word suspicious mail. The badge reveal cut off just before the seal was fully visible. The anchor's voice was careful. Questions are being raised about racial bias and use of authority. Questions. Marcus turned the TV off. At the shop, customers arrived slowly. Some came just to shake his hand. Others avoided eye contact. A few apologized for not speaking up. One man said, I didn't know what to do. Marcus nodded. Most people don't. The second officer came by just before noon. Out of uniform. Nervous. I gave my statement, he said. Marcus leaned against the workbench. What did you say? The truth, the officer replied. That it went too far. That I should have stopped it. Marcus studied him. That matters. The officer exhaled. I hope so. By afternoon, the news broke again. The officer had been formally suspended pending investigation. Body cam footage released to the public. The city issued a statement. Carefully worded. Apologetic without admitting fault. Marcus read it once. Then closed the page. An email arrived from the department's legal office. They wanted to discuss resolution. Settlement. Quiet. Marcus felt something twist in his chest. That night, he sat alone in the shop. Lights off except for the office lamp. The same spot where he'd reached into his jacket. He replayed the moment in his mind. The laugh. The shift. The badge. Justice had come. But it felt incomplete. Like a door only half opened. The next day, he walked into the Internal Affairs building. Clean. White walls. Cameras everywhere. He told his story once. Then again. He kept his voice steady. He didn't embellish. He didn't soften it either. When it was over, the investigator nodded. This will move forward. How far? Marcus asked. Far enough, the investigator said. Outside, reporters waited. Marcus didn't stop. Back at the shop, he gathered his employees. They stood in a loose circle. Uncertain. I'm not closing, Marcus said. And I'm not hiding. They nodded. One of them smiled. Later that week, the decision came down. The officer was terminated. Not transferred. Not reassigned. Fired. Marcus read the notice twice. Then set it down. There was no joy in it. Only a quiet release. Another notice followed. Mandatory bias training. Policy review. Oversight changes. Slow things. Structural things. The civil rights group called again. This sets precedent, they said. Marcus thought about the wrench. The hood of the car. The heat in his chest. Then use it, he said. The city offered a settlement again. Larger this time. Marcus declined. What do you want? The lawyer asked. Marcus didn't answer right away. I want it on record, he said finally. I want it taught. I want it remembered. The lawyer went quiet. That night, Marcus locked up the shop and stood in the doorway for a long time. Justice had come with paperwork and press releases, with consequences and careers ended. But it hadn't come without cost. Sleep didn't come easy anymore. Loud laughs made his shoulders tense. Sirens made his chest tighten. Victory didn't erase trauma. It just made space to breathe again. And as Marcus turned off the lights, he knew there was one more thing left to face. Not the system. Not the officer. But the part of himself that had learned, once again, how fragile dignity could be. The shop opened like it always did. Same time. Same sounds. Same smell of oil and metal and heat. Marcus unlocked the door and stood there for a moment longer than usual. The street was waking up. A bus hissed at the corner. Somewhere, a siren passed and faded. He felt it in his chest, sharp and brief, then gone. He stepped inside. Work grounded him. The lift rising. The clink of tools. The problem in front of him that had an answer, if you were patient enough to find it. By mid-morning, a letter arrived. Official. Heavy paper. City seal. Marcus read it slowly. The department's review was complete. Findings confirmed misconduct, abuse of authority, and racial bias. The officer's termination was upheld. Policy changes were listed. Oversight measures named. Training mandated. Words on a page. Necessary. Insufficient. He folded the letter and put it in the file cabinet. Closed the drawer. The sound was soft. Final. A customer approached him near the counter. Older man. White. Nervous hands. I saw what happened, the man said. On the news. Marcus nodded. I wanted to say, I'm sorry. For how people treated you. For not saying more when I could have. Marcus studied him. The apology wasn't polished. It wasn't rehearsed. Thank you, Marcus said. That matters. The man nodded, relieved, and left. Later, the reporter stopped by. No camera this time. They're calling it a landmark case, she said. Marcus wiped his hands on a rag. They like names. She hesitated. Do you? No, Marcus replied. I like outcomes. She smiled sadly. Fair. Before leaving, she asked, would you go through it again, knowing what you know now? Marcus didn't answer right away. He thought about the hood of the car. The officer's laugh. The second officer's silence. The badge heavy in his pocket. I shouldn't have to, he said finally. But I would. That night, Marcus sat alone in the office. The same chair. The same desk. He opened the drawer and took out the badge holder. He looked at it for a long time. Then he placed it back inside. Closed the drawer. It had done its job. But it wasn't the hero of the story. He was. Not because he had power. But because he endured. Days passed. The news cycle moved on. Another headline replaced his. Another video played. But things had shifted. A patrol car slowed when it passed the shop now. Not in suspicion. In awareness. People looked at Marcus differently too. Some with respect. Some with discomfort. Some with quiet understanding. He accepted all of it. One evening, as he locked up, the teenage boy from that day walked past. Older now. Straighter. Hey, the boy said. I filmed that. Marcus nodded. I know. I just wanted to say. I'm gonna be a lawyer, the boy said. Because of that. Marcus felt something loosen inside his chest. Good, he said. We need more. The boy smiled and walked off. Marcus stood there for a moment longer. The street lights flickered on. The shop behind him hummed as it cooled. Justice hadn't come loudly. There was no parade. No speech. No victory lap. Just accountability. Just change. Just the quiet understanding that power could be challenged, and sometimes, if you held steady long enough, it would crack. Marcus turned the key in the lock. As he walked to his car, he thought about the officer's last words. You set me up. Marcus shook his head. No. The truth had done that. And it didn't need a badge to do it.